What is up, fantasy people? You are back with the True North Fantasy Pod, presented by Monkey Knife Fight. I am Trav, coming live from beautiful Victoria, British Columbia, Canada, and co-hosting and West Coasting, as per usual, is Tyrell Mclaurin. Ty, how you living tonight, buddy?
Doing good.
Awesome. And we are also, of course, a part of the Fantasy Points Media Group, where with our promo code 21TrueNorth10, you can get 10% off at fantasypoints.com for all of the elite analysis resources and tools to help you score more. And that tie leads me right into our guest tonight. We're not wasting any time. This is going to be a fun one. He is a DFS and best ball degenerate, which in our world is absolutely like the utmost compliment that you can get. One of the newer stalwart staff writers over with our friends at fantasypoints.com, putting out a ton of good work, comes very highly recommended by friend of the show and also somebody who Ty has a budding bromance with, and that would be Mr. Scott Barrett. So yeah, we thank Scott. Scott has very good words for Mr. Jake Tribbey. You can find him on Twitter at Jake Tribbey. How are you tonight, man?
Doing great, man. Couldn't be more excited to be on the show. And I think Ty, you and me are competing for the bromance with Scott for sure, because I'm always trying to sneak in there.
Little love triangle, eh?
Yeah.
No, it's very much deserved, that's for sure. And I think I've read a lot of your work, and it's just been a lot of really good work. I mean, you've already taken a look-see for week one when it comes to DFS salary values, with all the salaries being released now. I think you have an article out with week one already for FanDuel and for DK, and that's on fantasypoints.com, of course. But the article I just love that I was talking to you about pre-show, I told you it kind of reminds me of like a PFF article meets a RotoViz article, just the analysis you don't see a lot of, and that people claim they don't have time for a lot of these days. But it's the way you gain edges, I think, in your leagues, and it's something that everybody should really have in their process, and that, I think, includes following Jake's work. And the article I'm kind of talking about is like the positional target tendencies one. I just thought that was so awesome, and I think that's actually a free article on the website, by the way. Even if you don't have a subscription, I don't know what you're doing, but
Tripping.
Article. And I kind of loved a lot of some of the context you applied off the top of that article, even just talking about the volatility of this game that we play of fantasy. Just a good place to start is always team or coaching tendencies. And I thought you married that with how important the quarterback position is when it comes to teams and just what drives teams' tendencies. I thought you went through that really, really well in that piece. Tonight, we're really not doing any of that. Tonight, we are doing some flag planting. My guys. It's a pretty popular series out there in the industry, but it's one of the more important ones. These are the guys that you can count on us for. And I was wondering, Jake, how do you define my guys? What's the difference between a my guy, a guy you're going to flag plant for, and a sleeper in fantasy football?
Well, it's tough to point out the difference between one of my guys and a sleeper. I suppose that sleepers may just not be very well recognized across the industry. For me personally, my guys are guys that I'm willing to take, in the later rounds, maybe 2 or 3 rounds ahead of their ADP. Obviously trying not to forego too much value in that regard. But guys that I've looked a lot into, I think that there's very sound reasoning. I typically expected fantasy points is a big thing that I use to identify my guys. And I'm mostly just looking for volume. I think underrated volume is a big thing in fantasy football, and that's really what wins leagues.
Yeah, and I think of it as a my guy, somebody I want to leave my draft with in almost every format, I think. And it's interesting. We talked about you being an expert in DFS and best ball, so to speak. And I think those are very, very different animals. They're also very different animals from redraft. But I find that right around this time of the year, I have to really change gears from best ball into redraft mode or into DFS mode. Do you find yourself doing the same thing? And do you think exposure percentages, like how much you own of a player in best ball, can sometimes reflect your my guys when it comes redraft season?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, we'll get into some of the specifics, but a lot of the guys I'm going to mention are my highest owned guys because I'm willing to take them, a round or two ahead of ADP, and they just end up on a lot of my best ball teams. Plus, as you guys know from following Scott's work, I mean, upside is everything. So in a lot of these instances, I'm chasing guys with, the highest upside in their respective round.
Yeah, you hear the term league winner get thrown out there a lot. I think one thing that gets lost is that guy needs to have top 5 upside more often than not. And those are the kind of players you should be chasing, especially the later on in the draft you get as you get deeper into a draft. But I think I love my guys because there's an element of like, if you listen to one thing we say this year, listen to our My Guys episode because we can try and make some people some money, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think a big thing too is that like you don't win leagues with your with the RB14 or whatever. You win leagues with the RB1, the RB2. So I'm definitely excited to talk guys with upside tonight.
Mm-hmm. All right.
So do you want to just dive right in, Trav, to quarterbacks?
Dive.
Well, I thought you were going to go up first because I have Lamar Jackson on my list here right away. And I was thinking, because I could steal him from you, because I definitely think he could be one of my guys. And I know that he made Scott Barrett's article as well. So why don't you get into Lamar Jackson, though?
Yeah, for sure. Lamar, this is a guy I just want to plant my flag in because I feel like he's almost getting a little bit forgotten about after he regressed from that MVP season, which we absolutely knew was going to happen. It just feels like everybody decided that he's not really the flavor of the month anymore. I think Josh Allen probably took that mantle. But looking at Josh Allen and the quarterbacks around him, I think like Josh Allen is that quarterback that is extremely destined for some regression this year. If not in the rushing touchdown department, in the passing department. I think Brian Dable probably keeps that passing game clicking, but I'm really curious to see what the rushing is for Josh Allen there. Patrick Mahomes, I mean, we can't expect the guy to have 5,050 touchdowns every single season. And then you got Kyler Murray is the other of the 3 quarterbacks who are going ahead of Lamar Jackson right now. And I mean, while he's looking to cement himself in that top 5, I think he's due for some regression as far as those 11 rushing touchdowns that he had. And I really wonder whether he's going to get very much higher than the 26 touchdown passes that he had last year, just because it doesn't really look like that offense is going to be as pass happy as we thought. So I think Lamar Jackson, who's going 7 spots behind Kyler in the 5th round in FFPC drafts right now, I think you can basically pencil in 1,000 yards, pencil in 5 to 7 rushing touchdowns. Everybody's worried about him as a passer and how he wasn't good passing deep. They don't like the volume, all of that jazz, but I think the volume is going to be a little bit better this year, guys. Like 376 passing attempts. They were only at 401 for Lamar the year before, but 376 since 2010. Only 6 quarterbacks have started 14 games or more and had 300 or under 400 passing attempts. And so I think like he's really likely to have a little bit of a bump in passing volume, if not a little bit more efficiency with those weapons. So I think we know that that he's going to be that rushing threat. And I think even if he doesn't get back to 2019 levels, but he gets somewhere in the middle as far as passing efficiency, like we're looking at a top 3 quarterback easily. And quarterback 1 is easily in his realm of possibilities. In fact, I think he has a good chance of doing that this year. So that's why I'm planting my flag into Lamar Jackson for this season.
Jake, do you agree with that take? And also, like, how much do you think his weaponry factors in? Because Rashad Bateman is banged up. Marquise Hollywood-Brown is banged up. How heavily do you weigh the weaponry being healthy and ready to go and hitting the ground running into that take?
Well, so the Ravens receivers, I mean, it's no matter how you look at it, this is a vastly improved receiving room compared to last year. So it certainly can't hurt. My big thing with Lamar is just that he's, I think, inarguably the safest pick in every draft right now at the quarterback position because of his rushing floor. I had a tweet a couple weeks ago, most avoided tackles since 2006 using PFF's data. Number 1 was Lamar. Number 2 was Lamar. Number 3 was Tyrod Taylor. And then tied at 4 was Lamar Jackson from the season he played 7 games. He's probably the greatest rushing quarterback of all time. I'm sorry, Michael Vick stands.
Easily.
I mean, like when you watch him with the ball, it's like, it's magical. Like the things that he does, the way that he makes professional athletes fall over. it's completely insane. So his floor is incredibly safe, and that's a big part of the reason I love Lamar. And then, yeah, obviously, he has great QB1, MVP type upside. So I mean, I think that's a great guy to plant the flag on.
I was thinking like one of the safer picks I think might be Russell Wilson, just with the new offense coming in there. I think if they can disguise some looks, inject some, motion, some play action there, and, play action is a facet of the game that Russ has had tremendous success in. And I think we could all agree that we love DK and we love Tyler Lockett. I think the running back and tight end groups are good enough to accommodate whatever market share gets heaped on them as well. So the weaponry, I think, is there. The defense isn't really, which I like. Like, I expect them to look closer to that shit defense from the first half of last year than that really solid defense we saw over the second half of the year. I could at least feel comfortable saying they might have the worst defense in that division. And I know it was a roller coaster with Russ, like with the first half and second half splits, not just last year, but the year before as well. But the Seahawks have a pretty easy second half strength of schedule this year. And it's a team that we feel pretty comfortable, like knowing what we're going to get from them. So I like projecting a second half strength of schedule for a team like Seattle. And that includes Detroit in fantasy championship week. So I really like their strength of schedule. And just with Russ, I think we can always rely on some of that elite efficiency. We talk about what we can chase and what we don't chase. Well, what we don't chase is what we can chase with Russ, if that makes sense, because he's kind of just a touchdown machine. Like we say, don't chase touchdowns, but we, don't tell that to Russ or the weaponry in Seattle throughout the years. Like he's just set to pretty much break the record for the most seasons having 6% touchdown rate or better this year. It'll be his 8th season doing it if he accomplished that this year. And it's not supernatural. Like he's led basically 4 seasons straight in end zone touchdown passes on PFF.com. I say basically because Andrew Luck 2018 doesn't count. And that's not supernatural either. Like the highest percent of his passes are traveling into the end zone. And just to marry these two sleepers, like Russ threw 11.4% of his passes into the end zone in 2019, 10.9% last year. Those are the two highest among all quarterbacks over the last 2 years. The next two highest are Lamar Jackson in 2020 and 2019, respectively. So these guys know what they're doing. These schemers know what they're doing, how to draw it up, and they have the weapons to do it. I think we just mentioned that Baltimore, probably has more weapons to accommodate that going forward. But we know Russ can just always facilitate that almost no matter who's on the field. And I think there's also people can argue about regression, but there's a regression to the mean that could come when it comes to his legs. Like I think so since 2017, last year was his most rushing yards per game over the last 3 years. And it was just over 30 yards per game, which is an extra free 3 points or whatever. But over those last 3 seasons, all quarterbacks with 200 carries have scored at least 15 rushing touchdowns, except Russell Wilson, who has just 5 in the last 3 years combined. So, any regression that he might experience in the passing game, I think he could compensate for in the rushing game with some ambiguity in that backfield. So I think Russell Wilson might be the safest pick at the quarterback position. What say you, Jake?
Well, I still think it's Lamar, but one thing that I want to point out with Russ is that something interesting that I found was that they basically don't give him designed rush attempts almost at all. I think it's 80% of his rushing fantasy points from the last couple seasons has just been from scrambling. So I don't think his rushing floor is necessarily as secure as a guy like Lamar, who gets, 6, 8, 10 design carries a game. So that's why I'd side with Lamar more as a safer pick.
I think I'm in that same. I was just going to say, Ty, I think I'm in that same camp too. I think the run game for Russ is starting to dwindle a little bit out of his game, maybe. And we might see, even a little bit like Aaron Rodgers, even though Russell Wilson's obviously a better runner, but he ran a lot more when he was younger too. And he kind of took that out of his game. He just uses his pocket mobility and getting a little bit outside of the pocket. And when he needs to lumber for a first down, I will give him that. But I see that with Russ, and I think he might be a little bit safer if you want that 5 to 10 finish, but I think Lamar is kind of shooting for that QB1, so that's why I sit there.
Totally. And I think the counterpoint would be, Russ's floor is pretty safe in the rushing department so long as that offensive line is that offensive line in Seattle. So that's, I think, you would attribute a lot of the scrambles to that. Pass protection breaking down quite a bit. And also just, who you might have to pass on in the 5th round to take Lamar. I think that's an area of the draft I still really want a wide receiver and stuff. But I think, Trav, what do you think about maybe passing on both these guys? Would that be the play and taking one of the rookies later on? Because I know me and you were both pretty high on these rookie quarterbacks.
Yeah, dude. The one that's my guy for this year is Justin Fields. And I am really, really, really excited to see him get on the field. He looked really good in that first preseason game. Andy Dalton came out today and said, "It's my time." Little quote from the Red Rifle there, saying that it's his time right now. And I think, for a short time, it might be Andy Dalton's time, but I think sooner rather than later, Justin Fields is getting in there. And when he does, we have a locked in top 12 quarterback, in my opinion. I have him right now as my quarterback 14 for the season because I'm very confident that he will get in sooner rather than later. He's just the real deal. He offers the Konami factor exactly the same way that we want from Kyler Murray or even a Jalen Hurts. I'm not going to put him on Lamar Jackson's level of Konami, but he is a great runner. He got better throughout his college career. He actually forced 20 missed tackles in 14 games in 2019. Came back in 2020, forced the same amount in only 8 games. So maybe he got a little bit more feisty in there or something like that. But he was decent in yards after contact among the quarterback position as well. So I like how he gets it done on the ground. And then when you look as a passer, he had more than, you talk about the touchdown rate for Russell Wilson. Justin Fields had over a 9% touchdown rate in both of his last 2 seasons with Ohio State. Protected the ball too, 9 picks in 2 seasons, which isn't terrible. Great throwing off play action, great throwing deep. So he just gives you everything you want in today's quarterbacks, especially those rushing upside guys that are kind of sweeping the top of our rankings. So yeah, and the weapons in Chicago are pretty decent for a rushing quarterback. He doesn't need to have 3 dynamite wide receivers like the Steelers do, because he's going to compensate for that with his legs, right? So, and I think they do still lean on the run game a little bit in Chicago, especially with Justin Fields, because he's going to be dynamic in that area. So getting him in the 11th round right now in drafts, hello, you've got that upside sitting there. If you want, take a Ryan Fitzpatrick at the end of the draft or something like that, just to make sure you insulate that first few games. But even so, you could get that guy off the waivers. So I'm taking Justin Fields, and I'm confident that when he gets in there, you got a quarterback 1 easy.
Do you think?
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, first fun fact, he ran a faster 40 than Allen Robinson.
Nice.
But I was going to ask Jake, sorry if I stole your thunder there, but I'm wondering, because you said he's going as in that 11th round. I think he's going to really shoot up, and we got reports that he's going to start playing against the Ones next preseason game. Mm-hmm. So Jake, how high is too high if you're wanting to draft Justin Fields?
That's a tough question. I would say probably anything past QB 12, maybe a little too rich. I mean, we haven't seen him play, so it's hard to know. Obviously, he's got that secure floor because of the rushing upside, but it's hard to know exactly how effective of a fantasy contributor he's going to be when we haven't seen him play. Not to mention, there is a non-zero risk he might not play at all this year. I think it's very unlikely, but if Andy Dalton has the best season of his career, a la Alex Smith in, 2017, 2018, whatever the year they had Mahomes
where
and didn't
Nagy
play him.
Was in Kansas City, yeah.
Exactly.
Burn.
So if Andy Dalton plays really well, Justin Field may not see the field, pun intended, until mid-season, end of season, and that could really hurt his value. But at the same time, once he does step onto the field, I have a decent amount of faith. I know a lot of people have lost faith, but I actually do have a decent amount of faith in Matt Nagy as an offensive coordinator. With the way the Bears offense looked in 2018, I thought was very encouraging, and Trubisky just ended up being so bad that they had to kind of dial back the creativity there. But yeah, once Justin Fields does take over that starting quarterback role, I think he could be a potential league winner. So yeah.
So the rookie quarterback I want to plant my flag on for league winner status is definitely Trey Lance. And I know I've talked a lot about him, so I'll try and go bullet style here for you, Trav, because I know I've really no idea.
You love you some Trey Lance. Yeah.
It's kind of a 49ers theme for a lot of my guys this year. It's crazy, but it has a lot to do with that super easy strength of schedule, including the best late season strength of schedule by quite a wide margin by most metrics. And also we talk about when these rookie quarterbacks might play. They have the earliest bye week in all of football, which is week 6 this year, just to remind people with the 17 game schedule. And I just think, the like Shanahan and the 49ers, they should go with Trey Lance week 1, in my opinion, just because he adds the multiple elements to this offense, right? Like that Jimmy G just doesn't. Like Trey Lance, it's a classic. He opens up the playbook kind of guy for one of the NFL's best play callers and schemers. And Kyle Shanahan, and with Lancelot, like the rushing upside, the escapability, we know about that. But I think like the arm strength is just kind of on a different level, in my opinion, and like compared to Jimmy Garoppolo. And maybe we see a vertical element in the passing game, and that has just been non-existent in the Bay Area, especially last season. Like the 49ers have actually had a quarterback over 200 attempts, but under 6.8 air yards per attempt, according to RotoViz, in back-to-back seasons. And over those 3 years, only 8 other quarterbacks in all of football registered in air yards per attempt below 6.8 when they had over 200 attempts. And after Jimmy G was super efficient in 2019 per PFF on deep balls that, past that travel 20 plus yards through the air, he was just atrocious last season. And the deep ball is kind of the engine that has stalled last year in that 49ers offense. That play action is just kind of so deadly in this scheme. And I think all of that can be much, like, I think execution wise, I would pick Trey Lance over Jimmy Garoppolo this year. And I think we're seeing that early on in the preseason with some of the offense that they're running. Like, I just think the legs, the deep shots, these are not only like, these are the traits we want to chase when it comes to fantasy, but it's also what we saw right away. Like, I'm not kidding. I don't want to overreact to, preseason, but I was already pretty high on Trey Lance, but I moved him into my QB1 range 1 snap into the preseason, like against Kansas City, that first play, that call an overreaction, I know, but like it was a play action drop, and pressure came, he escaped and delivered a strike on the run. Brendan Ayuk, uncharacteristic drop. So it was just a great play. And then his second pass of the game was actually like the opening play of the second series. And he hit Trent Sherfield on like an over route for an 80-yard touchdown pass. That was kind of the headline grabber, had a bit of a wobble, but I just thought it was really great to see because he played like 20 plus plays against Kansas City in the first preseason game. And I just thought his box score was a little bit disingenuous. Like, I think he went 5 for 14. Didn't have a lot of passing yards, but there was like 3 or 4 drops by wide receivers. He was sacked 3 or 4 times, one being a forced fumble, which, aside, not great, because I think that forced fumble came with like under 40 seconds in the first half. So just like thinking about, that might stick in their minds when they think about going for blood at the end of a half, if it is Trey Lance or something. But, that's my fiery take on Trey Lance. I also really like Justin Fields, and to be honest, I think all of these rookie signal callers have impressed early on in preseason out of camp. It's all been pretty glowing for almost all 5 of these guys who went in the first round this year. So Jake, like, what are your thoughts on how that 49er situation plays out? Or is there like a rookie quarterback we didn't mention that you think has league winning upside this year?
No, I think you guys hit the nail on the head. Like, I'm huge on Fields and Lance, and to be honest, like, I really, really prioritize them as my QB2 in redraft because they do have that league-winning upside, near the end of the season. When it comes to Lance, like, I love the situation. I mean, you really couldn't dream of a better team outside of maybe Kansas City. Like, is there a better situation for a rookie quarterback to get thrust into? Kyle Shanahan, like, another bullish note, in my opinion, is that Kyle Shanahan knows like what he's doing with rushing quarterbacks. He had RG3, and RG3 basically put up like borderline MVP numbers in his rookie season until he unfortunately tore up his knee. So Kyle Shanahan like knows exactly what he's doing. I think he's going to use Lance in the perfect way. This offense has a ton of weapons. Lance's upside is probably higher than Fields, although that is difficult to quantify. But yeah, I love both rookie quarterbacks. I think those are both great picks.
So who do you got for us then? We talked pre-show, and one of your guys I think almost constitutes as a rookie quarterback since we didn't get to see him very much.
Yeah. So the guy, first and foremost, that I'm planting my flag on is Jalen Hurts. So Hurts, in my opinion, probably has the strongest rushing upside of any quarterback not named Lamar Jackson. Scott Barrett pulled this note, and I thought this was an incredible stat pull. So Hurts averaged 24.8 fantasy points per 4 quarters, 11.3 fantasy points rushing per 4 quarters. or 25.9 fantasy points a game in games started and finished, and 9.9 rushing fantasy points per game in those games. For perspective, 24.8 fantasy points a game would rank 8th best all time, and 25.9 fantasy points a game would rank 5th best. 11.3 rushing fantasy points a game would rank best all time, and 9.9 rushing fantasy points a game would rank 3rd best since 1975. He offers an elite combination of rushing upside and rushing floor. And I think another crucial note is that he was really bad passing the ball last year. He was 7th worst in PFF passing grade, 6th worst in passer rating, and he had a league worst 65.1% adjusted completion percentage. And I bring that up to say that if he improves at all in those metrics, that's just gravy, because he's already a top 12 fantasy quarterback just based on his rushing performance. So I'm huge on Jalen Hurts. I'd take him right around like QB7, QB8. Which is, I think, higher than he's going pretty much everywhere except Underdog, which is a ridiculously sharp site. So I'm not doing many drafts over there. But yeah, I'm pretty much all in on Jalen Hurts this year. I love him. There is my one thing with Hurts, though, is that there is a benching risk. Like if he continues to pass the ball at a very, very poor rate, I think the Eagles' backup is like Nate Sudfeld or it's
Flacco.
Oh yeah, okay, it's Flacco. So maybe that benching is
maybe going into the season.
Yeah. So he'd have to play really bad for Flacco to come in. But like I said, I mean, he wasn't great passing the ball last year, and if that continues, there is a slight chance he gets benched.
Oh, I love it. That is music. Ty, that's music to my ears. My boy Jalen Hurts. I am a Birds fan, and I think you nailed it with that rushing floor. I'm curious to hear what you think he does for those passing weapons, and like, how do you see him holding up maybe one of the receivers? I don't think he's going to hold up both of them. And what's going to shake out with that tight end situation now?
Oh man, the tight end situation. So Scott did like a preseason week 1 review article at fantasypoints.com, which was outstanding. It's really everything you need to know from week 1 of the preseason. But he pointed out that Zach Ertz played 7 of 10 first team snaps with the Eagles, and Goddard only played 5. Mm-hmm. And so he said, like, basically that means one of two things. Either it's time to panic on Goddard and Ertz is a screaming value, or the Eagles are just trying to get a stronger look at Ertz before they trade him, in which case both likely Goddard and Ertz are values. So it seems like regardless, Ertz is a value. Neither of those players excite me very much. Obviously, neither has great upside, and if they play together, then they're just going to cannibalize each other's production, and you may not end up with either one being a tight end one. When it comes to the specific receivers themselves, I'm sure that we've all seen all the incredible catches that Jalen Reagor is having in camp, which is very exciting, especially given just what a great athlete he is. And they're moving him to the slot, and that could be a pretty significant thing. So he may end up seeing solid target volume. But the guy that I'm most excited about for sure is Devonta Smith. I mean, people bring up the BMI, but like Smith is an outlier any way you cut it. He's one of the only wide receivers ever to win the Heisman. He had arguably the greatest college season by a wide receiver ever. And I think he's going to be a beast at the next level, regardless if he weighs less than me or not.
Yeah, I think his length can kind of compensate for that. Like you see him on the field and his arms are just like so long, man. And he's tall enough to get it done. So I think his elusiveness will help him in that, obviously. And I'm super excited for the future with him. Sorry, Ty, I kind of hijacked you there, but I just really wanted to hear what Jake had to say about the evolution of the Birds offense, because I was stoked that he had Jalen Hurts on here.
And I think that's the big point that I would just say kind of encompasses everything you guys are saying, is that it is a new era for this Eagles offense, or at least on the horizon here. It's going to be much different than the pass-heavy Wentz nature. Like, I'll put it this way. The Eagles have a 5-game streak of 100 yards rushing as a team. Doesn't sound like much, but it's the first streak longer than 4 games in the last 3 seasons. And that's not a coincidence that it coincides with Jalen Hurts. And it's something I've been beating the drum all offseason about, Trav, and that's that this is going to be a much more run-heavy offense than people might be anticipating. And I think that's being lost when we talk about players like Devonta Smith, like Jalen Reagor, especially when you factor in the bloody tight end and running back market share. I just don't see how we can expect a lot of weapons in this passing game to pay off their ADPs. Different story in Dynasty, but definitely in redraft, I think Hurts is the player to attach to in fantasy from the Eagles, which is a check mark for Mr. Jake. So who's your other guy, Jake? Even though Trav kind of spoiled it by saying grab this guy late.
Oh yeah.
So my other guy is Ryan Fitzpatrick. So since 2018, Fitzpatrick has averaged 19.1 fantasy points in the 27 games he started. That would have ranked 12th among quarterbacks last year. But even more impressive, in the 23 games he started and finished, because, he's been benched a decent amount, he averages 22.6 fantasy points a game. Over the last 3 years, only 2 quarterbacks average more fantasy points a game over that span, Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson. And I think a crucial note for Fitzpatrick this year is, unlike a lot of other years when he was in Miami and with Tampa Bay, there's basically zero risk of him being benched for Taylor Heineke or whoever their backup is. He's going to play all 17 games. And I love the upside here. He's I would quarterback's obviously way less volatile than wide receiver, but I would kind of consider him like the Tyler Lockett of quarterbacks, where he has legitimately some of the greatest fantasy performances in quarterback history. And then also will have some of the worst games you've ever seen, stuff that makes your eyes bleed. So, but with the benching risk being gone, I really like him as a pick. It's a little more dicey in redraft, but especially in best ball where you don't have to worry about when to play him. I think he's one of the best late round picks you can make.
Oh, that's good. I see a little bit of 2019 Jameis there, where he's just going to throw it up and we just need him to stay healthy. He's going to make a ton of mistakes, but I think he could put up big numbers. I'm not necessarily saying top 5 numbers for Ryan Fitzpatrick, but I mean, he could be up there with the Brady's, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, and especially in passing yards. I remember seeing on DraftKings Sportsbook, he was plus 4,000 to lead the league in passing yards. As a flyer bet, I think that's pretty solid. He's crazy aggressive. He's been, I had a stat, I think it was he's been top 5 in average depth of target in 4 out of the last 5 seasons, and that was with 4 different offensive coordinators. Yeah. So he is one of the most exactly, because any quarterback who plays for Arians is going to be up there in ADOT, but he is just one of the most fundamentally aggressive quarterbacks. And you can't take that out of him, no matter who the coach is. And that's definitely something to chase for fantasy. And trust me when I say I'm going to play him so much in DFS. Pretty much every week, I'm going to have some Fitzpatrick shares.
Oh, I like it.
And even if he does change a little bit, there's a lot of free yards built into an offense that has Antonio Gibson, Curtis Samuel, J.D. McKissick, Terry McLaurin, De'Ami Brown. These are players who can definitely serve roles that are going to be really beneficial for Ryan Fitzpatrick. My only pushback to the comp would be that Washington is a really competitive team. I've just never seen Fitzpatrick on a competitive team. It kind of trips me out. He has played for some bad football teams, and Washington probably has some division winning aspirations this season. So it'll be interesting if he does start playing some YOLO ball, and there is some familiarity with Kyle Allen as the backup quarterback, and Taylor Heineke, I know, could have come out and had a big camp and maybe made some noise. I know that's kind of fallen to the back burner, but there's no doubt at the price you're paying, especially in a redraft league, you can drop Ryan Fitzpatrick if it doesn't work out. Yeah, absolutely. And I think another more minor risk with Fitzpatrick is that Washington's defense is going to be awfully good, and they obviously have Antonio Gibson, so they could be fairly run heavy this year. But that still doesn't change the fact that he's one of the most aggressive quarterbacks in the league and will probably provide some, really great fantasy performances this year.
Not sure if you guys heard, but he's also a Harvard graduate, so he'll know how to use those weapons. A very educated man. Ty, I'm going to get us into the running backs here. You know that we love some running backs on the True North Fantasy Pod, and I want to start at the top of the docket for you, Ty. Your heartthrob, we know him, Aaron Jones. Why don't you talk a little bit about why Aaron Jones is once again on your flag plant list?
No, I mean, the market is coming around. I think that's why I put him on the list. I've been, Aaron Jones top 5 running back. He's 6th overall player for me for a little while now. I have an Aaron Jones as a top 5 running back video in the feed, in the podcast. Scroll down a bit. So I won't give all the why, but he's just an elite running back, I think, in almost every facet of the game. And all he's been missing is kind of that heavy workload, the volume, which I think he could see in 2021. And even if he doesn't, the situation, the talent just makes Aaron Jones one of those running backs who could score 20 points per game in fantasy without seeing 20 touches per game. I think his efficiency has been elite by land, by air, in the touchdown column. And I just think he's going to see a career high by far in red zone touches. And even if he doesn't, like Aaron Jones has been one of the best running backs in all of football since entering the league at scoring touchdowns from outside the red zone. So as a lot of running backs after the big guys like Christian McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, they just kind of keep on falling, it seems like. I think Aaron Jones just keeps moving up the boards. And yeah, he remains my 6th overall player in PPR leagues. But I have another one that I want to throw out here, Trav, because he's someone I just haven't seen. I'll put it this way. I thought he should be rising up draft boards as the offseason has progressed, but it's like he kind of stopped in that 5th, 6th round range. And that's Mike Davis. I feel like Mike Davis as a talent is somebody I like. I like the Falcons' lead running back for fantasy, which is something I haven't really been able to say since Shanahan left the building, really. And thinking of bodies leaving the building, like not Kanye, unfortunately, but this offseason, sorry, I couldn't resist. But so many bodies left Atlanta this offseason, like Todd Gurley, Julio Jones, the entire regime from general manager to the coaching staff. Finally, which I mentioned because Atlanta ranks top 5 in available targets. They rank just 12th in air yards available, so lots of volume in this passing game, not a crazy amount of air yards. And with the new head coach, Arthur Smith, coming from Tennessee, trying to kind of replicate the Falcons' 2016 success and schemes, the departure of Julio, Matt Ryan turning the corner in his career arc, in my opinion, I think we should expect Atlanta to try and run the ball a lot more, even with a pretty sobering win total. I accept that. But the Falcons, I think, will just struggle to put up like league-shattering passing volume that we've kind of been accustomed to over the last few years. So maybe some of that available volume that we see in the passing game converts to the run game. And if we shift our focus to that run game for the Falcons offense, like staying in the context of available volume, courtesy NBC, whatever, formerly Roto-World, John Daigle, Atlanta has over 450 running back touches up for grabs from last season when Atlanta was a pass-heavy, faster-paced offense. And the Falcons rank 1st in running back carries and 1st in running back targets available. About 90% of their goal line carries are up for grabs. And who is there besides Mike Davis? I mean, I watched the first preseason game and Jalen Hawkins looked like shit. I don't think he's going to be a thing. He had 6 touches in that first preseason game, 4 yards. Jalen Hawkins, I think I just said Jalen. Jalen Hawkins is the standout. Javion Hawkins, the running back, sucks. Jalen Hawkins, standout on the other side of the ball of Atlanta. But that's neither here nor there. What I'm saying is Dante Foreman isn't going to be a thing, not getting much buzz in camp. So it's just Mike Davis, maybe a sprinkle of Quadre Olsen in like short yardage situations. And even if you disagree with everything I just said about the scheme, the tendencies, all that, if you think they remain like a top 5 pass heavy team in Atlanta, then Mike Davis is going to smash in that area of the game as well. He was top 10 across the board amongst running backs in receiving metrics. And it wasn't just the situation in Carolina. Like he actually replaced Christian McCaffrey pretty admirably, but he led on PFF. He led all running backs in forced missed tackles on receptions, and on the ground, he was really elusive as well. He was I think 3rd among all running backs with 50 touches on PFF's elusive metric. The bulk of his yards came after contact. So I just think everything is pointing to Mike Davis being drafted at his absolute floor. And I think talent-wise, I think he's an upgrade over 2020 Todd Gurley, who was the running back 29 in PPR, running back 25 in half PPR. And you think of like 2016, Devonta Freeman was RB6 with like the 13th most touches. So I think there's going to be a lot of efficiency, and Mike Davis is still going in that 5th to 6th round. So I know I just pumped a lot of air there, but what do you think, Jake? Do you think Mike Davis is that league winner, or do you think there's a big cap somewhere like running back 12? Like where would you put that cap if I'm wrong?
Yeah. So like personally, I love Mike Davis as a player. Like I obviously watch a ton of football, and like he makes a lot of guys miss. He's a very, very good running back. He doesn't necessarily have the breakaway speed you like to see, but in terms of elusiveness, he's up there with pretty much everyone. Like he actually is, I'd say, one of the most underrated running backs in the league, at least skill wise. My problem is that Arthur Smith has hinted at this being a committee, so that makes me think that his upside is capped. If we knew for sure that he was going to play 80% of the snaps, I'd have him at like RB10 or something ridiculous. Like he's a really good player, and I think this is going to be a pretty high scoring offense. I'm not sure if that'll translate to a lot of wins for Atlanta, but there should be a lot of points to be had for Davis, and he's clearly the most talented player in this backfield. So I really love Mike Davis, and I actually had a pretty interesting stat from an article that I did in the spring, where Atlanta's 19% vacated target share ranked 18th, but they had a 36% vacated target share behind the line of scrimmage, which ranked 5th. So there's a lot of short targets up for grabs for Davis.
Nice.
And that could be pretty important for PPR.
That is a deadly stat. I was just checking, Ty, and on the site, our True North consensus, we got Mike D at 20, and you and I are in lockstep having Mike D at 21 both. Would you buy or sell that finish for him? Like, would you rank him there, Jake?
Yeah, I'd have him somewhere between 20 and 24, I think. Yeah. It's just tough. Like, I think we're going to need to see the first couple games just to see, like, is he playing 55% of the snaps or is he playing 75%? Because there's a huge difference between that. But I do think the upside there is really strong. And he's definitely one of my favorite guys to grab in the RB dead zone for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like it. So Ty, we talked a little bit of rookie quarterbacks. I'm going to plant my flag on a rookie running back here, and that would be another league winner, in my opinion, for his position, and that would be Javonte Williams. Obviously, reports that we're hearing are that Melvin Gordon's the running back 1, but that was prior to him getting banged up with a groin injury. He missed the first preseason game, and we know that he's had a bevy of injuries in the past. But then you look at Javonte in the first preseason game, he had 29 yards on 5 carries, and he looked like he was going to be ready to punish guys, running right into dudes, little bowling ball Javonte Williams. So I'm really excited for that. I like how he looks for that contact. He did average more than 4 yards after contact per attempt each of his past 2 seasons at North Carolina. And he had the most missed tackles forced in all of college football last year. Second most runs of 10 plus yards, which, you wouldn't think that he would break off that many big ones just because of his size, and maybe he doesn't have crazy speed, but he can break them off with his elusiveness and his tackle breaking. So I'm really stoked for Javonte Williams to come into that role. Melvin Gordon is a little bit worrisome, but I really think that Javonte Williams can take over the 1A portion of this 1A, 1B split. And I think that can still be fruitful in this Denver offense. They have those passing weapons, but I really think that with the quarterback situation, a resurgent defense, which we've been chatting about, Ty, you've been mentioning that big time. Denver's one of your favorite defenses to bounce back. I just really think that plays into the run game, and they have 2 running backs who can hold up to some. Well, obviously Melvin Gordon gets hurt, but he has taken some.
Do you think they add a back, Trav? Because Melvin Gordon dealing with a groin injury. We know Mike Boone's on the shelf for up to 6 weeks. So do you think they add a running back? Do you think that would be a smoke signal we should pay attention to?
I think that guy's lower on the totem pole than Royce Freeman, even if they do for now. I mean, it depends on how long they assess Melvin Gordon and Boone to be out, because I think Boone could be a bit of a factor in this backfield. But I think they gave Royce Freeman some decent run in that first preseason game. And, he comes with a little bit of previous talent and draft pedigree. I think he was a 3rd-round pick. So I think there is a little bit of talent there. Maybe I've just always kind of liked Royce Freeman, so maybe I'm a sucker. But I'm curious, Jake, when do you think Javonte is going to take over this role? And do you think it's going to be, top 20 upside where he's given us some wide receiver 1 weeks? Or do you think Melvin Gordon's still going to be that thorn in his side?
Yeah, it's really hard to say. If I had to guess right now, I would assume that they go committee for pretty much the entire season, which I know Javonte owners don't want to hear at all. But at the same time, like, there is also the possibility that he's just so much more talented than Gordon that he gets the vast majority of the run. And you also have to consider that they traded up a lot. Like they gave up, I think I may have it somewhere in here.
Yeah, we all thought Atlanta was taking him with that pick.
Yeah,
and then Atlanta is like, no, Mike Davis.
Yeah, Davis. I don't have the exact numbers, but nice. They gave up a lot to move up to grab Javonte Williams, and he's a really, really, really good player. He set the PFF all-time record for forced missed tackles per attempt at 0.48, which is just absurd. And he's also the youngest running back in the class, which bodes well for his development. I'm huge on Javonte, but that's more so in Dynasty. I'm I'm pretty iffy on him in redraft this year. I love him as an upside play, but I really wouldn't feel comfortable with him as one of my first 2 running backs in redraft. I think he's like, you want him as your 3rd running back, maybe your 4th, have him ride the bench for most of the season. And then once you see like, oh, he's getting 60% of the snaps now, then you fire him in because he's probably going to be really efficient. And hopefully, you know, this is a at least improved offense from last year. So there should be more points to be had.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I like that assessment. And I think, you know, he showed some chops as a receiver in college. He got 30 targets last year, caught 24 of them, even with Michael Carter in the same backfield. So I'm pretty stoked about Javonte Williams coming in this year. And I just think he could be that guy who blows up to give you those weeks that win those pivotal matchups at the end of the season, especially with the attrition that Mel Gordon's gone through. Mel G, the Forgotten Spice Girl, Ty. You remember that? I almost forgot about that nickname for Melvin Gordon, but that's a classic there. Jake, we're not purposely trying to leave you to the end. I just want to say that you are the main event, so we want to make sure we highlight your guys as our guest tonight. So I'm going to just let Ty finish his guys off here, and then we're going to get into some of your guys. Ty, who's your last guy?
Well, I have Trey Sermon on here. I was thinking of maybe leaving it out. I don't want to step on our buddy's toes here, but you know, Trey Sermon is a guy that I think, like some of my information will definitely lend to some of Jake's information. I just think I saw Trey Sermon in the first preseason game, and a lot of people are kind of taking a step back a little bit. I thought he showed how elusive he was in that first appearance. And like PFF, we talk about Javonte Williams. That was the only guy who had a higher missed tackle rate over his college football career on PFF among running backs who got drafted in April compared to Trey Sermon. So he is an elusive running back. I know he had an uncharacteristic fumble, and it was because he kind of dicked up his shoulder on the play. And I know people are a little bit worried about his durability, but I think that's an equal concern for a lot of these 49er backs, to be honest. So I just think, you know, we saw Raheem Mostert get the night off. So we saw Trey Sermon with the ones. That was nice. And we saw him catch a couple of balls, which was nice. He was clearly ahead of Wayne Gallman, which not all rookies get that treatment. And I just find from like a box checking standpoint, I'm really gravitating towards him. Like I have a hard time not drafting Trey Sermon in every draft. Like he got higher draft capital than any other running back in the Lynch Shanahan era. We've seen this regime give the work to one guy. It was Carlos Hyde, and that wasn't even that long ago. Shanahan was kind of a one back guy historically before the Falcons and 49ers RBBC days. And I just think we see multiple valuable running backs that have paid off in the past in Shanahan backfield. So I think there's room for multiple running backs to pay off. Definitely, you know, trading off huge spiked weeks at times. So I like this offensive line. I like the outside zone scheme, all of which builds in yards before contact, as will Trey Lance when we get that injection of the RPO concepts in this offense. And that will also make Trey Sermon feel right at home in a very similar scheme to the Ohio State one that he had a tremendous amount of success in last year. And, you know, I've given this stat a lot, Trav, and I understand that Trey Sermon or Trey Lancelot would cut into this a little bit, but the running backs in San Francisco averaged over 30 touches per game last year, and they scored over 30 fantasy points per game in PPR. And just as an aside, Trey Sermon's like a great guy to root for. I don't factor that kind of stuff in very much, but I think it was Ross Dellinger of Sports Illustrated who wrote like just a really awesome, sobering piece of life when it comes to Trey Sermon and some of the things he had to overcome and some of the injuries he's overcome. I really like him, and he's one of my highest owned players in best ball and somebody I will be reaching for in my home leagues, I think. So, Jake, tell me what you think about Trey Sermon. Give me any pushback that you want, and then get into your first my guy.
Yeah, so actually, your bit on Trey Sermon kind of leads in well to one of my flag plant guys, which is Raheem Mostert. And this will kind of be like some Sermon pushback, and I could be convinced either way on this, but my main argument with Mostert is that I think he should clearly be getting drafted ahead of Sermon. And I have a few reasons for that. So since week 13 of 2019, Mostert has seen at least 10 touches in every single game. And over that span, he's averaged 14.7 fantasy points a game and 5.4 yards a carry. Obviously, he's helped out by San Francisco's scheme, but he's still a very, very good player. And every single report that we've seen from camp so far is that he's the starter. And barring injury, he's basically a lock to lead the league's most efficient rushing attack, other than maybe Baltimore, in touches. So, and another reason that I prefer Mostert to Sermon is that, in my opinion, both him and Sermon have similar ceilings, which is roughly 60% of San Francisco's snaps and touches. But Sermon's floor is much lower because when Jeff Wilson returns, he's more likely to take, snap share and touch share away from Sermon than he is from Mostert, who's already entrenched as a starter in the backfield. My final point here is basically that this is, to become the starter, it's an uphill battle for Sermon, but it's a downhill one for Mostert. Mostert also has the 14th largest contract on the team, which is, I think, fairly relevant. They paid him because they wanted him to be that starting running back in the backfield. And I definitely see, the bull case for Sermon, given that they traded up to get him. And like you said, he's one of the highest drafted running back in the Shanahan era. So yeah, I personally prefer Mostert, and I would much rather draft him ahead of Sermon. And I don't think ADP really reflects that right now.
No, and I think like my take on Mostert's always been summed up. I've said it a couple times on this pod, Trav. Like he could start hot, stay hot, be hot, and that's always the risk with these guys. My pushback would be that he's old and he's going to get banged up. He's like, I wouldn't bet on somebody getting hurt more than Raheem Mostert. I wouldn't bet on somebody having over 5 yards per carry more than Raheem Mostert as well, though. That's a great point. He's just literally a supernatural efficiency station.
Yeah,
big play.
Yeah, and I would imagine all these San Francisco running backs are going to average over 5 yards per carry. And I mean, once Lance takes over, Sermon or Mostert could make a push for leading the league in yards per carry and, surpass J.K. Dobbins. So, it might be the Patriots backfield of old where you're just grabbing as many shares of as many guys because it's cheap enough where you can do so and you can drop the guys who don't work out and replace them with some high upside backs. Because, I think there might be a little bit more utility, whereas someone like even Javonte Williams, who you have to spend such a high draft pick on, might be somebody you're literally holding and might have a hard time doing so if you get off to an 0-2 or 0-3 start in your home league. So I think, all these guys we're talking about come with upside and downside, and a lot of your my guys aren't going to be guys who are going in that first and second rounds of fantasy drafts for sure.
Totally.
Yeah, so who's your final running back, my guy? And it can be a guy in the first, second, third round, whatever you want.
Yeah. So the big one for me is Najee Harris, and I'm crazy bullish on Harris, and I think that there's a lot of great reasons to be. So both Steelers GM Kevin Colbert and head coach Mike Tomlin stated that they were, quote, ecstatic to land Harris. And what makes this such an ideal landing spot for Harris is Tomlin's history of running back usage. He said himself last May, I'm a featured runner type guy by mentality. Usually when it's going well, it's because you have a lead dog out front and that guy is the featured runner. And if you just look at his history of fantasy RB1s, it's been absolutely ridiculous. Le'Veon Bell crushed from 2014 to 2017. And when D'Angelo Williams stepped in for him, he averaged 22.9 fantasy points a game in the 13 games that he started and finished. When James Conner stepped in for him after Le'Veon Bell held out and then left the team, Connor averaged 22.3 fantasy points a game prior to hurting his ankle in week 14 in 2018. And then in 2019, he averaged 17.8 fantasy points a game prior to a week 9 shoulder injury. Le'Veon Bell over his career averaged 21.5 fantasy points a game in Pittsburgh. And in my opinion, the absolute worst case scenario for Harris is basically a recreation of Le'Veon Bell's rookie season where he only averaged 16.7 fantasy points a game, but that would still have made him RB9 in 2020. So I love Harris. I think that with running backs, really all you need to look at is snaps and touches. Like with some of the other positions, you can get more into the weeds and talk nuance, but snaps and touches is all that matters for running backs for the most part. And Harris has a great chance, as good a chance as pretty much any running back that isn't Christian McCaffrey at being top 5 in both snaps and touches. So I draft volume when it comes to running back, and that's why Harris is one of my favorite guys.
I think you add a talent like that on top of all of that volume and snap share, and I think that's just an explosive top 12 running back, top 5 upside as a rookie running back in my book. Ty, as the resident Steelers fan, you got a thought on Najee?
Yeah, I think everything that I've said all offseason just lends to Najee Harris, whether it's a Matt Canada offense, the incredible emphasis we've placed on, fixing this run game. And, the average depth of target isn't going anywhere. It's going to stay low because no matter what you think about the offensive line, Ben's going to get rid of the ball in under 2.5 seconds, 3/4 of the time. It's just going to happen. And a lot of that has to do with that triangle kind of read style where you look at deep, you look at intermediate, and then your dump off's there. And that dump off is going to be Najee, and that's going to be there all day. I really think that, because we've already seen in the preseason, even off play action, which will mystify us when we see Big Ben using play action in itself. That is just a mind-blowing concept in itself. But it won't surprise me if even after those deep drops on play action, he's just dumping the ball off in the middle like we see to James White all the time and stuff in New England. So I think Najee Harris is really set up to have a volume-driven season, and I think he's more – I just think there's a lot of ways he could pay off his ADP, and he's pretty much being drafted at his floor. And if volume is king, then you definitely want Najee Harris. And if the type of volume is important, then you definitely want Najee Harris.
Najee all day.
Mm-hmm. And the touchdown regression that Pittsburgh's going to experience, Big Ben's going to experience, the volume that's going to come down in the passing game, none of that affects Najee Harris. In fact, it probably helps him, right?
Yeah, and Big Ben's failing arm strength is, I think, a big bullish note for Harris, and Deontay Johnson too as well. But like Big Ben just really can't throw the ball hard down the field, it appears. So that's going to lead to a lot of checkdowns, and not to mention that Harris is, I believe, the highest ever running back, like, or the highest pick Mike Tomlin has ever had or spent on a running back. So that's another bullish note as well. Pittsburgh has a massive incentive to give this guy the ball. And I mean, if you look at like Pittsburgh news articles or beat reports or whatever, they just keep saying like, oh, Najee Harris is going to be the guy that like saves this run game. Like it seems like the hopes of the city are on Najee Harris's shoulders, and that's going to mean a lot of touches.
Big boy. He's a big boy, so I think those shoulders can handle it. I got to finish one off that I almost forgot about, guys, and I cannot believe it. We're going to stick within the AFC North, and we're going to go to the Dob Goblin, J.K. Dobbins. Been one of my favorite running backs since he came out. Just kind of love that situation for him, even without the pass catching. So looking at the offense, we obviously know that the offense for Baltimore is great for rushing volume. If you look at teams with the highest rushing attempt numbers since 2011, 3 of the top 4 teams are the last 3 seasons of the Baltimore Ravens. So they just run at historical clips. We've documented that pretty well. Ty, you've had some pretty good studies on that Baltimore rushing offense. And you also coined the Jackson 5 rule. So you guys were talking about the San Francisco running backs and their 5 yards per carry. Lamar Jackson backfields produce 5 yards a carry running backs. No ifs, ands, or buts. J.K. Dobbins led the league in that category last year with over 6 yards per carry. And look, guys, we all know there's not going to be very much passing work. That's just not how this offense operates. It's not how Lamar Jackson operates. But that's why I think it's about expectations for J.K. Dobbins. If you think running back 1 is in his realm of possibilities, you're going to be sorely disappointed. That guy that's hitting running back 1 over just the past 3 years is averaging 121 targets. And I'm not necessarily sure that I would bet that J.K. Dobbins is going to get 21 targets this season. So I think we just can't expect that necessarily. What we can expect is a whole lot of efficiency on a solid carry volume. It's easy to do this, but if you look at Mark Ingram from 2019, he had a running back 1 season on 201 carries at 5 yards a clip for just over 1,000 and 10 touchdowns and only 30 targets. And he was a back end running back 1. So if your expectation is like between 6 and 14 finish, and if you're happy with that, if you take him as your running back 2, obviously that's a little bit better in drafts because you might have to do that by the time you're drafting here. But I just think J.K. Dobbins can get the volume that Mark Ingram had and use his explosiveness to just blow those numbers out of the water. I see him as a lock for like 200 to 250 carries, a lock for 1,200 rushing yards, a lock for double-digit rushing touchdowns. Like that's how confident I am with him. His breakaway percentage is Nick Chubb levels. Those two are actually the only over 40% last year. For anyone listening that's not aware of breakaway percentage, it's percentage of yards gained on runs over 15 yards. So yeah, I just think the red zone work's going to be there. If he gets 30 targets, that's just a cherry on top, fellas. So I am going to take my flag, toss her in, and I'm going to cement that bad boy in on J.K. Dobbins because of all of my guys, this guy, the Dob Goblin, is the one that I am most excited for this season. Jake, what do you think, though? Like, do you think setting those expectations when you're drafting maybe a late second round, early third round running back are realistic, or should you still be trying to find that guy that does have that running back one overall upside at that point?
Yeah, so I'm typically always chasing upside, but I do love Dobbins' floor, and I think, like, especially if he's going to be your second running back, he's a very strong pick. I don't necessarily like him as much as an RB1. I'm hesitant on his ceiling because Lamar's going to steal a lot of those goal line touchdowns, and he's not going to see like any receiving involvement. Basically, I mean, we know that rushing quarterbacks don't target running backs. So I'm not super excited for Dobbins in PPR, but I think, like, I mean, I don't know if anyone plays standard anymore, but especially in standard leagues, like I'd love Dobbins as like maybe even taking him like a, RB11, RB12. Like he's going to be probably the most efficient running back in football again this year. So I love the floor, but I just question the ceiling.
For sure. Where I see it a little bit differently is that rushing touchdowns within near the goal line. Sorry, Lamar Jackson only had one last year, so that would have to see a bit of an increase to eat in. The guy that you got to worry about, I think, there is Gus Edwards, but he's been super inefficient in the red zone. And J.K. Dobbins was 6 for 7 on goal line carries as far as punching it in last year. So I think he's just going to be. I think they're going to lean on him, but. Lamar Jackson is the first guy that touches the ball, the easiest route to the end zone when he gets in close like that. So I could definitely see a little bit of upwards regression as far as those goal line carries for Lamar. Ty, what do you think about the Dob Goblin and his potential ceiling as far as fantasy finish?
Yeah, I have that saying where they kind of like need that supernatural season just to be a top 5 running back. So is he an arbitrage play on Derrick Henry? Absolutely. Is he on the wrong side of the running back dead zone cliff for me? Yeah, I don't find myself, targeting J.K. Dobbins in drafts very much, even though he was one of my favorite running backs in that class and, isn't in the worst situation. It really just comes down to the names around him, like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, like DeAndre Swift, who I think come with immense pass catching upside. So I think that's my concern. And I love my unbreakable records. That's one of my favorite kind of stats, So I think the Ravens having back-to-back 3,000-yard rushing seasons is like they're the first team ever to do that. And I think they could do it again next year. So I think this is a team you want to attach to have one of those supernatural seasons. You know what I mean? Like, I do think he is a better pick in the third round than Derrick Henry is in the middle of the first round. But I still think he's a tough pill to swallow when you're looking down the barrel of some elite wide receivers in that range of the draft that he goes in. But I will say, like I was talking about the Eagles having 5 straight 100-yard rushing games as a team, that actually ties for the 4th most active streak. The Ravens have 39 straight 100-yard games. I think they're just a couple away from breaking that all-time record, which I would imagine is held by the Steelers. I think they need 5 to break it. Like, I think the Steelers have 43, so they would need 5 to break that record. But that
would be another unbreakable.
That is a robust, but I also think we need to factor in, like, I came into this offseason thinking that this team would really meet in the middle of last year, where the offensive line, some of the weaponry, that they just weren't able to accommodate a lot of the stuff they wanted to do on offense after that, supernatural season in 2019. And when it comes to efficiency. So if we expect them to try a little harder in the passing game, maybe that comes at the expense of some efficiency overall from this offense. So they also play a very tough schedule in a very tough division. So I just don't think it's a lock as much as some people think. And that's why he's going in that third round, I think, for J.K. Dobbins. Yeah.
No, I dig it. So Ty, you mentioned elite wide receivers as far as guys that go in the range of J.K. Dobbins. So why don't you take it away with some wideouts? I know Jake's going to take a bathroom break there in true North fashion. We're running a long episode, but we're stoked because we've had some shorties recently, and I'm super excited for us to get a whole bunch of information out. Actually, Ty, this is a good time for me to give a shout out to our friends at Monkey Knife Fight. Go over to Monkey Knife Fight, get in on some of those player prop games, and use our promo code TNFF at sign up, and they will match your first deposit up to 50 bones. Drop 50, get 50. You got 100, and we really appreciate the team over at Monkey Knife Fight for having us. And while we're here, and while Jake's taking a little break, I want to also say thanks to the Fantasy Points Media Group. We obviously, Jake is from fantasypoints.com. We mentioned it off the hop, but I'd like to give it a little bit more of its just due. Love the team over there. We were talking with Jake before the show, Ty, about how awesome the Fantasy Points team is with Graham and Scott and how gracious they've been with their time and helping us. And so we just kind of want to return that favor by highlighting all the work that they're doing over at fantasypoints.com. So if you want to get a real edge in your league this year, make sure you go to fantasypoints.com, sign up with our promo code 21TrueNorth10, and you can get 10% off all the analysis. So they've got a ton of resources, databases. Their articles alone are worth the price of admission. The Discord channel is incredible. I'm pretty sure right now, John Hansen is in an AMA on the Discord. And I think he might have Joe Dolan with him right now. Last week, or I think Scott's done a couple in the last couple of weeks. Graham was on one a couple of weeks back. Like, that is incredible to get instant conversation with some of the best fantasy analysts in the industry. So go sign up. That promo code's 21TrueNorth10 at fantasypoints.com. Jake, welcome back, my man. I took that opportunity to say hi to a couple of our sponsors, and Ty's going to lead us into these wideouts.
Great.
Yeah, so this is somebody that I've talked so much about, Trav, and it's going to continue the 49ers theme here, guys, because it's Brandon Ayuk. And like I went into the deep passing woes. Like, there has been a serious deficiency when it comes to the deep passing game in San Francisco. If you look at PFF, though, about 30% of the 49ers deep ball targets last season went to Brandon Ayuk. What really made me double take, though, was the other high leverage work. Under 10% of Debo and George Kittle's targets last year came inside the opponent's red zone, compared to about 30% for Brandon Ayuk. 30% of his targets came in the red zone. When healthy, even George Kittle and Debo only saw about 10% of their targets come inside the red zone. Since I'm using PFF data, I want to zoom in even closer and look at Ayuk leading the team by a mile in end zone targets and end zone market share. He led the team in end zone targets, followed by, what's his face, who went to the Patriots?
Kendrick Bourne.
Kendrick Bourne, thank you. Followed by Jordan Reed, lest we forget. But those three guys combined for 16 end zone targets. The rest of the team combined for 7, including Kittle and Debo, who weren't injured all season long. So it really shocked me how much all this high leverage work funneled through Brandon Ayuk as a rookie wide receiver. So I think this is a guy who is primed to actually deliver some wide receiver 1 weeks throughout the season. And it won't surprise me if he finishes as a top 12 guy all this season. My other guy, Trav, who I have not shut up about, and I just want to throw out one more time, is Robert Woods. Draft Robert Woods. He is a top 12 wide receiver, at the very least, a back end wide receiver 1. So, Jake, what do you think about those two NFC West wide receivers?
Yeah, so I absolutely love your Ayuk call. I wrote him up in a sophomore standouts article. My only concern with Ayuk is that he may have a significantly lower floor than Debo Samuel. Debo gets a lot of screens, and he gets a lot of carries. Ayuk doesn't really play that role. And I think once Trey Lance comes in, you could see him go a lot more run heavy, and that could hurt Ayuk. And I'm not sure, we need to get a full season of Lance to understand how aggressive of a passer he truly is. But Ayuk does most of his work down the field. So if Trey Lance ends up being like a more conservative kind of quarterback, then that's really going to hurt Ayuk. At the same time, though, like, he's shown incredible upside, and he was very consistent last year. He averaged 15.4.
In the most conservative offense. Sorry to butt in there, but that was a very conservative deep passing game last year in San Francisco.
Yeah, and he had 7 games of more than 17.5 fantasy points and 4 games with more than 10 targets. Granted, 5 out of those games came without George Kittle, and 4 of those games came without Debo Samuel. So it's still hard to gauge exactly what Ayuk's true role is going to be, because he played so much last year without San Francisco's other star players. But I absolutely love the upside of Ayuk.
And from a talent standpoint, like, he checks all the massive indicators I like to be checked, that early production and all that. And I know it does worry people about the splits, and I concede he won't be, he was like a top 3 wide receiver for that 9-week stretch. I know Ayuk himself only played 6 of those 9 games, but yeah, he only scored behind like Diggs and Tyreek over that stretch, or Diggs and Adams or someone. So yeah, I concede he's probably won't be a top 5 wide receiver, but I think he's being drafted at his floor for sure. And I think that there's a little bit of like a Steelers element. Like, this offense can only improve when it comes to like thinking about Najee being in an offense that is borderline ready to set records for underwhelming rushing as a team in Pittsburgh, and it's going to go completely the other way. I think there's an element to this where, Minnesota isn't the highest volume passing game, but the play action, it's efficient on those deep targets. And I think we saw that in preseason game 1. I hope it's Brendan Ayuk and not Trent Sherfield on that overrun.
I'm gonna stick in the NFC West for my first flag planter wide receiver tie. Wow. And I'm going to get into my second one as well, because that's who I really want to dive into. But the first one is Tyler Lockett. You mentioned him a little bit earlier, Jake, and Tyler Lockett is my first flag planter. Everybody is loving DK. That upside is huge. DK is huge. He is probably the best deep threat wide receiver in the league. And I think he probably does have wide receiver one overall upside, just with the efficiency he gets with Russell Wilson's deep balls. But that's all good and well for me, but I am going to stick with old trusty and stay with my man, Tyler Lockett. He came into the league. He was kind of that speedster deep threat with Angry Doug Baldwin as the slot guy. Tyler Lockett was getting, I think it was like in the 70s targets. And then DK comes along and Tyler Lockett says, all I do is win, 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 and says, give me those 100+ targets and I will produce in a much bigger way for you. So I do like DK, but I'm just not sold on that second year price for the fact that I think his profile relies a lot on kind of high variance production, being that guy who's getting those downfield targets. I get the historic deep ball passing for Russell Wilson. Totally get that. And I can see that, but I think there is a possibility where DK is, falling off one week and then giving you a couple spike weeks. And then the consistency just might not necessarily be there for him throughout playing that role for this team. And I think Tyler Lockett can just win in any way. He's been a red zone threat, taking deep shots, taking shorter targets. I love me some Tyler Lockett. So I think everybody out there in fantasy land should go lock it up. Actually, one thing I want to ask you guys, how many players in the last 3 years have more touchdowns than Tyler Lockett?
I don't know. I tweeted that out not too long ago, actually. So
That's
I should know that.
Only 4. And that would be Adam Thielen, Mike Evans, Tyreek Hill, and Devontae Adams. So the guy is an elite producer.
Yeah, sorry to cut it. Like, that goes back to what I was saying about the end zone targets with Russell Wilson, right? Like, DK and Lockett combined for 30 end zone targets last year. And, this also has to do with the ambiguity behind those two, I think, in this offense. Like, these guys had about 50% of a very valuable pie last year in Seattle in every facet, and that includes end zone targets. But Lockett, for instance, had 16 end zone targets. That was tied with Devontae Adams and Allen Robinson for the most in football. And his 10 touchdowns all came in the end zone, and that ranked third according to PFF as well. So, and DK Metcalf had 14 end zone targets, tied for 6th in the NFL. So both those guys, top 6 in end zone targets from one of the most efficient guys in the end zone. And what's really amazing is it's hard to see, two teammates finish top 10 on just an end zone targets list, but they also finished top 10 in like completed air yards lists as well when you look at Sports Info Solutions. So just some crazy high leverage, I think, available for these guys. And Tyler Lockett's the cheaper of the two. And we've seen the rapport and chemistry.
I actually have a great stat for Lockett. So over the last 4 seasons, here are the wide receivers who have caught the highest percentage of their contested targets: Michael Thomas, Chris Godwin, Stephon Diggs, Kenny Galladay, and then Tyler Lockett. Like, it's all like big-bodied guys, and then 5'10" Tyler Lockett, who is somehow amazing at contested catches. My only pushback on Lockett would be that outside of his like incredible blow-up games where he scores 50 fantasy points or whatever, he's basically a wide receiver 4. I definitely understand your concern with consistency in regards to DK Metcalf, but I think that may be a bigger concern with Lockett. But at the same time, he's a tremendous talent, and he has as good a chance as any receiver of having the highest scoring fantasy game in a given season. So,
and I think the touchdowns are a big part of Lockett, like chasing touchdowns. What I was talking about with Russ, like, there's only 8 wide receivers who've scored 200 PPR points in back-to-back seasons. You mentioned that touchdown stat, Trav. Like, that's Tyler Lockett is one of those 8 guys, and touchdowns are a big part of that. It's just, like, to your point, Jake, unfortunate that 3 of them come in week 2 and then 3 of them come in like week 9. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Love some Lockett, but The guy that I really want to talk about is a mega heartthrob of mine at the wide receiver position, and that would be T. Higgins. We got tons of hype in Cincinnati around Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, that connection from LSU, and rightfully so. Chase, he looks the part already in some of his training camp highlights. Joe Burrow last year seemed like he was on the right path before getting injured, and this offense is perfect for wide receiver production, obviously. But I don't think we can lose sight of T. Higgins. I think like Jamar Chase, his versatility, I think that's going to potentially affect Tyler Boyd more so than T. Higgins. I think there is a lot of trust placed in T. Higgins, as we saw throughout the season last year. And I think he can win in more ways than he gets credit for. So obviously we know he's going to be that downfield target. One cool stat that I got from fantasypoints.com was that T. Higgins produced over 52 points from the red zone last year, 52 PPR points. And that was good for 11th in the NFL among wide receivers. And that was over 25% of his production as a rookie. So I think as a baseline, T. Higgins is going to give us a nice little floor as far as red zone targets. And you look back at his days in Clemson, even he scored 14 of his 25 touchdowns in his final two seasons from inside the 20. So I think he's already polished as a touchdown maker. And then you look at the Bengals offense, and they threw the ball 56% of the time in the red zone, and that's 12% over the league average. So they really just like to throw the ball to those wide receivers in every area of the field, maybe to the detriment of Joe Mixon a little bit, but that is to the benefit of my man T. Higgins. So I really think he's a little bit more versatile than that, in that he played a little bit of slot last year. They trusted him there, even with Tyler Boyd, the slot maven. And yeah, I just think as a deep target, he's going to continue to excel. Joe Burrow can't get any worse in the deep passing department than he did last year. It was atrocious. But T. Higgins was still targeted the 7th most down the field. Unfortunately, he just only caught 9 of those 28. So I think that's going to skyrocket a little bit this year. And he could be at the top of the league as far as deep targets. And I think that can just lead to deep touchdowns as well. So I am really excited for that upside as somebody who profiles as an alpha for me. So he's the guy that I want out of this Cincinnati Bengals wide receiver trio. Jake, who is the guy that you want out of the Cincinnati Bengals wide receiver trio? Are we glossing over maybe Tyler Boyd a little bit too much too?
So I think like pretty much all 3 guys will see over 100 targets. This was a crazy high volume passing attack last year, and I really don't expect that to change. The defense isn't very good. The entire city's hopes, I actually live in Cincinnati. The entire city's hopes are on Joe Burrow's shoulders. So I expect there to be just a ton of passing the ball, but the guy that I want is Jamar Chase for sure. I think that the college connection is genuinely an important thing. The fact that Burrow and Chase are familiar with each other. And I mean, Chase is one of the best wide receiver prospects of the last decade. Like, it would not surprise me if he broke Justin Jefferson's rookie receiving record, or maybe it was second all time, I forget. But if he had a better season than Justin Jefferson did last year as a rookie, because he's so good. I mean, like, he's an incredible player, and the breakout age, like what he did as a 19-year-old at LSU was just incredible. And historic. I'd say like but the main tiebreaker for me between him and Higgins is just that he's familiar with Burrow, and that Cincinnati spent so much draft capital on Chase. And I know Higgins was a 2nd-round pick, but there's a big difference between that and being the number 5th overall pick. So Chase is the guy for me.
Yeah, and there is something to be said for them. Yeah, exactly. And there is something to be said, like you said, for them drafting him that high after selecting Higgins in the 2nd round. I think for me, that's definitely more of a 2021 take as opposed to a dynasty take, because I think Jamar Chase is that dude. But I'm still hitching my wagon to T. Higgins this season.
And we saw in their first preseason game, I think they only played 6 snaps, the first team without Joe Burrow too. But we saw Higgins and Higgins and Jamar Chase out there for all 6 snaps, and Tyler Boyd out there for just 4 of them, which was less than ideal. So I thought that was interesting. But I think the point here is 3 wide receivers in Cincinnati had 100 targets last year. That should happen again this year. We know about 70% of the market share will go to that position. It already has in both seasons under Zach Taylor, without a Jamar Chase at his disposal. And yeah, spending that high of capital on him and not Penei Sewell gives them a lot of incentive that even if it isn't working downfield, maybe they kick Chase inside and start seeing what he can do after the catch. Hopefully they mix that element of his game in immediately regardless. But I think they could do that more so if it isn't working downfield. So I think Chase has a lot more floor when it comes to like how the season could play out from Joe Burrow's perspective. Hopefully he gets over the yips or whatever's going on there pretty soon. Like, do you have any concerns about Joe Burrow? Are you a little bit hands off right now, Jake, as somebody who is in that city?
Joe, I should say that Joe Burrow is the most famous person in Cincinnati, and it's not even close. Like it's actually ridiculous. Like, yeah, I know he should be. But I'm hesitant with Joe Burrow. For the most part, I try to stay away from quarterbacks without rushing upside. And obviously Burrow doesn't really have that. Another concerning thing, you kind of touched on this, Trav, was that his downfield passing was terrible. He had the worst PFF grade on passes of more than 20 yards last year, which was just absolutely brutal. But at the same time, like, an encouraging sign is that he had, I think, the third or fourth best grade on passes within 20 yards. So he's a very, very accurate quarterback, but scouts in the draft process did say, like, hey, his arm strength may not be what you like to see out of a guy who's going to be the number one overall pick. And that may be what's causing the downfield passing woes. So that'd be probably more of a knock for Higgins than it would be for Chase, or especially Boyd, given that I'd expect Chase and Boyd to run shorter routes. Right, but I'm fine with Burrow as like QB 15, QB 16, somewhere in that range. I definitely wouldn't take him top 12 though. And I don't really think he has a chance to be a top 5 quarterback, because top 5 quarterbacks can all run at this point. Like, there's so many great rushing quarterbacks in the NFL at this point that guys like Burrow, they're never going to be high end fantasy QBs, unfortunately.
So speaking of high end guys, I had DJ Moore, I had Michael Gallup, I had Emmanuel Sanders in here. I definitely want to talk about more. I actually want to talk about Chris Evans while we had a Cincinnati guy on, but we don't have time. And I want Jake's my guy for the wide receiver position. Give me 1, give me 2, give me as many as you got, because I want them all. And I think our listeners definitely should hear who you have as your my guys at the wide receiver position.
Yeah, so my first one is Terry McLaurin, and I love McLaurin for a variety of reasons. So Dwayne Haskins and Alex Smith basically didn't give McLaurin a chance last year. They didn't give him much to work with. In my, you mentioned my QB target tendencies piece, and in that piece, I noted that they only threw 23% of their targets to outside wide receivers over the last 3 seasons, compared to Fitzpatrick, who I believe threw like 31%. He was roughly 8% higher than them in terms of passes to outside receivers. And as I noted earlier, Fitzpatrick is much more aggressive than those two. Both Haskins and Alex Smith
the vertical route rates and stuff is insane. But you're going one end of the spectrum to the other on that, in that capacity. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's all going to benefit McLaurin. And so the final bullish note that I have for McLaurin is that he played through not 1, but 2 high ankle sprains last year. And prior to injury, he averaged 17.7 fantasy points a game. So at wide receiver 10, like, in my opinion, McLaurin's basically being drafted at his floor. I don't see any way, like, barring injury, obviously, that he's not a wide receiver 1. And I think he has as good a chance as really any player of being the overall wide receiver 1 this season. And he just doesn't seem to be getting much credit in that regard, which is really surprising to me, because he's a tremendous talent. Like, I don't know. I just think, like, him playing with Haskins and Alex Smith kind of made some people overlook the fact that he is, like, genuinely one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. And with an aggressive quarterback, like, he's going to have some monster games. Like, I don't know. I think McLaurin's going to crush this year.
A quarterback who's famous for locking into his wide receiver 1 too, in Ryan Fitzpatrick. And just to put this out there, the lowest completed air yards per game played over the last 2 seasons, minimum 200 attempts from RotoViz here. 2020, Alex Smith. 2020, Dwayne Haskins. 2019, Dwayne Haskins. The bottom 3, all Washington quarterbacks. Like, it is literally, I think, going to be one end of the spectrum to the other when it comes to that average depth of target, when it comes to deep balls and all that kind of stuff. I think, like we said, there's a lot of free yards, and Terry McLaurin factors into that because of what he can do after the catch. Like, he's a very well-rounded wide receiver as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And as of right now, it just doesn't seem like the market has priced in this quarterback upgrade at all. Like, I mean, wide receiver 10 is reasonable if Dwayne Haskins is the quarterback. It's just not with Ryan Fitzpatrick. So my other guy is Jacoby Myers. And I want to preface this by saying that everyone has a type. and that make Jacoby Myers is absolutely my type. So he went undrafted. He's a former quarterback, and he's not a very good athlete. But man, can this guy run routes? He gets open, and he is a very talented receiver. Like, he's a really, really good receiver, especially given the fact that he didn't start playing receiver until I think his sophomore year of college. And I believe that he broke, I don't have this exact stat with me, but I'm pretty sure that he broke North Carolina State's receptions record that was previously held by Marvin Harrison, I believe.
And just throw it out there, Calvin Harmon just cut from that team. Like, he was on that team, and Jalen Samuels, like, all these guys are kind of fizzling out, and look at Jacoby Myers go.
Yeah. So the primary reason that I'm bullish on Myers this season is because I'm fairly confident that he's going to be New England's starting slot receiver. After Julian Edelman went down in week 7, Myers went from 6.8 slot snaps a game to 31.7 slot snaps a game, which is an eerily similar number to the 36.7 slot snaps a game that Julian Edelman averaged from 2019 to 2020. And that slot role is extremely important in New England's offense. From 2007 to 2019, Wes Welker, Danny Amendola, and Julian Edelman averaged 16.4 fantasy points a game over a 12-year sample. And like, how often do we get 12-year samples in fantasy football? That 16.4 fantasy points a game would have been good enough for wide receiver 14 last year. I already touched on the fact that Myers is a really, really good route runner. He had the 11th best yards per route run and 27th best PFF grade, receiving grade out of 108 qualifiers last year. And after he became their starting slot receiver in week 8, he averaged 13.1 fantasy points a game and 7.4 targets a game. And that was with like pretty subpar QB play. Cam Newton wasn't great. And once Mac Jones comes in, like, I'd expect Myers to really be locked on from Jones at least. So right now, I would say that Myers' floor is roughly like 12 or 13 fantasy points a game, essentially what he averaged last year. And his ceiling is like 16 or 17 fantasy points a game. He could be a real PPR cheat code. And I honestly, like, I would bet a lot of money. I haven't seen this offered on any sports books, but I would bet a lot of money that he leads New England in targets this year.
I like that, especially if Mac Jones gets in that offense too. I think Mac Jones is just going to be a boost for this offense as far as a distributor, and I think that reflects perfectly on Jacoby Myers. Guy even caught 6 of 10 deep targets for a little bit of upside if you like that. And to your point about his PFF grade overall, he scored over a 92 PFF grade on all 3 of short, intermediate, and deep receiving last year. So kind of like your analogy at the start, he's just good at football, you know what I mean? And he's not going to jump off the page. But that's much like past wide receiver ones on the New England depth chart. So that's a really good point on Jacoby Myers.
Yeah, exactly. He fits the mold of what they like over there, and I'd expect him to feed him with targets. Plus, like, all the coaches seem to really like him. So I love Jacoby Myers. He's one of my favorite players to watch in the NFL, just because, like, I don't know, guys who are terrible athletes that succeed in professional sports is always fascinating. So I love Myers so much. I'm really rooting for him personally, and I do think he's a tremendous fantasy value this year.
Shout out to the hefty lefty, Jared Lorenzen, by the way. Just want to give Jared Lorenzen a shout out if we're talking about unathletic football players. Go ahead, Ty.
Well, I was just going to say, there's only a handful of players, less than a handful. There's only 4 players last year who had over 50 catches and 2 touchdowns or less. Jacoby Myers had 0 touchdowns and almost 60 catches. He had 59 catches, 729 receiving yards last year, and caught 0 fucking touchdowns. Like, that is the biggest candidate for positive regression in the touchdown column I've ever seen in my entire life.
Yeah, well, I think the second in line, Ty, might be my first my guy tight end, because I'm going to talk to you guys about Evan Ingram here. I know that he's not like that sexy name as we move into the tight ends. And for me, like, I'm not taking those top 5 guys necessarily as my flag planter for fantasy. I want it to be a little bit more outside of the box. And I've been pounding the table a little bit for Evan Ingram, Jake. We actually had Jeff Lambert from Going for Two on a little while back on our Scott Fishbowl episode, which was a blast. And he was also in camp Evan Ingram. And I just think it's based on what I expect his volume to be and how glaring his likelihood of regression to the mean is. Ty mentioned the 0 receiving touchdowns for Jacoby. Evan Ingram on 109 targets had 1 receiving touchdown for the New York Giants. I don't see how that does anything but increase, and maybe he doesn't get the 109 targets that he had, but I think even on 80 targets, he's going to give you a couple more touchdowns than that. I think the only real difference between last season and his rookie season, which we all love, is those 5 touchdowns. Because if you look, Jake, he only had 6 more targets as a rookie. He only had 1 more reception as a rookie, only 38 more receiving yards, only 21 more yards after the catch, and only 30 more PPR points. And 30 PPR points is 5 touchdowns. And that's how many more he scored in his rookie season. So I think like with just a little bit of regression to the mean in the touchdown category, he can give us that top 12 tight end season. And I'll be honest with you, Kenny Galladay's already hurt. He does not necessarily scare me. He's not a 140 target per season type of player. He's like a 90 target per season type of player, and he's going to give you 65 catches for 975 yards or something like that if he can stay healthy. Slayton and Shepard, those guys are dart throws in my book at this point. And Saquon Barkley should have a solid share of targets, but I think that still leaves plenty of meat on the bone for Evan Ingram to crush that tight end 15 ADP. So I think if you're looking for a super late tight end, you can get him at the 11-12 turn in drafts for the most part. I'm planting my flag in that, man. And I think the top 8 wide receiver or tight end upside is easy money for me at that late point in the draft. But I'm curious what you think about Evan Ingram and about just that Giants offense overall.
Yeah. I'm big on Ingram. I mean, going from talking about unathletic Jacoby Myers to arguably the league's
so many parallels, man.
Yeah, right. But yeah, no, Ingram's one of the most athletic tight ends in the league, and obviously athleticism, in a way does translate to upside. My only pushback with him would be there's a lot more target competition in New York than there has been in the past few years. Like they've got a pretty stacked wide receiver corps right now. Kadarius Toney should get some targets, and obviously you already mentioned Galladay and Slayton and Shepard. So I would expect Ingram's target share to come down a little bit this year, but at the same time, I do think like he's a pretty clear value. I'd probably draft him around like tight end 8, tight end 9.
For sure,
and he seems to be going lower than that in most drafts. He obviously doesn't have a chance to be a top 3 tight end, or maybe even not a top 5 tight end, but I think he's pretty safely a top 8 or top 10 guy. And when it comes to the Giants offense, I think it's going to all come down to Daniel Jones, honestly. I'm not fully sold on Jason Garrett as an offensive coordinator, but yeah, the big thing is just going to be Jones and how he performs. Can he deliver accurate passes? Can he run 70 yards down the field without falling over? I don't know. So we'll see this year.
Oh, Danny Dimes. No, I love the Evan Ingram assessment. I think, top 8 is a nice little place for him to settle in. The last guy that I just wanted to mention at tight end, because he's basically free, is Austin Hooper. There's a world where he's the 3rd target on the Cleveland Browns. They paid him to come in and be a big piece of the offense, not just as a blocker. I'm not saying that he's going to give us his final season in Atlanta numbers, but I think for a guy who had 5 tight end 1 weeks last year, he's actually going as the tight end 25 in fantasy points ADP right now in the 16th round. I think that's, if you can punt the position, you can take Austin Hooper. Much to your point about Ryan Fitzpatrick earlier, Ty, you can drop Austin Hooper and not feel bad about it whatsoever because you took him in basically the last round of your redraft league. So that's just kind of my honorable mention guy there. Ty, why don't you toss us your tight end, my guys? Let us know who you're planting those flags in. I think I have an idea of who they're going to be because I know where you like to go at that position. But
I went kind of douche mode. So yeah, a lot of my guys are just the guys like if you get a theme, it's take the early tight end. So I'll just say Mark Andrews and TJ Hawkinson. Mark Andrews is dealing with some ancillary pieces in that wide receiver group that is they're banged up. Hollywood and Bateman are banged up. I try and not avoid players who are banged up in the preseason, but if they're not super proven and they're not in a super advantageous offense, sometimes I do. Sammy Watkins is somehow getting buzz in camp. But that number 1 wide receiver going back to week 11 of 2018 has unequivocally been Mark Andrews in that Baltimore offense. And we're getting him at a bit of a discount when it comes to him having a dip in touchdowns last year, in my opinion. I think his route participation, Willie Snead leaving is kind of a bigger deal than people are making it out to be when it comes to that rotation in the slot, how important that position is at the middle of the field for that matter, for Lamar Jackson's success. And then TJ Hawkinson, I think, has the capacity to have a volume-driven season to pay off his ADP and maybe climb into a bigger tier at the tight end position. He could also monopolize like that 10 zone market share with Golladay and Marvin Jones gone from Detroit. So whatever you think might be there inside the 10-yard line from Jared Goff, I think Hawkinson could monopolize that. But I think Darren Waller is the guy who should be, top 15 consideration, even in non-tight end premium leagues. He has that kind of volume upside, and I think the Raiders are going to be that bad. I think they're the worst team in that division. It's not even close. I think their defense is bottom 5 in the league and will be in EPA against deep pass and things like that lend to, game scripts that we like when it comes to shootouts and shit. So the one guy I want to give it up for, though, as always, is my third overall player, Trav, former Bearcat for our boy on the pod tonight, and that's Travis Kelsey. Like, what can you say about Travis Kelsey? Like, 2 of the best 4 fantasy seasons of all time by a tight end have been by Travis Kelsey. Most PPR points per game ever in the history of the game. Travis Kelsey, 2 of the 3 highest receiving yards totals by a tight end ever have been all in the last 3 years. All of them ranked top 10 all time by a tight end because of Patrick Mahomes and this magical marriage. And I just don't see many of this change, like anything really changing in Kansas City when it comes to a guy who owns the tight end receiving record coming off a career year, and people are still apprehensive at cost about Travis Kelsey, which I just don't get, because he's giving you an advantage you're not getting anywhere else in the draft, in my opinion. And I think there's an argument to be made for Darren Waller, but I don't think there's much of an argument for anyone else coming anywhere close to Travis Kelsey. What say you, former Bearcat yourself?
I absolutely love Kelsey. I think that there is like solid justification to take him 3rd overall in PPR leagues. I know that Jeff Henderson, our fantasy wins above replacement inventor and expert over at Fantasy Points, I believe he had him 3rd overall in his war article. So I love Kelsey. I mean, he's going to see the highest target share, most likely, outside of maybe Waller, of any tight end. And because Kansas City throws the ball so much, he's probably going to see the most targets of any tight end. He's an incredibly skilled route runner. There was that great clip of him like basically breaking Denzel Ward's ankles, which, like, for a guy who's 6'7" and weighs 270 pounds, like, how is that even possible? Like, stuff like that's just crazy. So yeah, I love Kelsey, and I think you can justifiably take him 3rd overall and certainly above ADP. He's going 6th right now. So I think 4th or 5th is totally fine for Kelsey if you decide you prefer a guy like Kamara 3rd overall. But yeah, I love Kelsey, and obviously, the Cincinnati connection runs deep. So yeah, he's one of my favorites, and I'll grab him wherever I can.
Mm-hmm. I think for me, when I'm staring at Kelsey in like the top 5 of a draft, it's just really hard to not pull the trigger on one of those stud running backs to kind of bolster the running back position. I think that's the only tough part. Like, I've dabbled in it in specific drafts where I've taken Travis Kelsey, in the top 5 of drafts. I know Ty 100% practices what he preaches. I've seen his best ball drafts, and it is a lot of Travis Kelsey.
We talk about exposure. Like, you're not supposed to have 1st-round picks as your highest, the players you have the most exposure to, and that happened with Travis. Like, if Travis Kelsey gets hurt this year and misses all season, I am fucked in but, like, I'm not kidding. It would literally cut my ROI like in half, probably. Like, it would cut my portfolio that I'm looking at winning leagues in down to like 67% of my leagues. That's how much exposure I have to Travis Kelsey, which is just crazy to think about. But it kind of reminds me of the 0 RB running back in the CD Carter video, where it's like, I love your roster, but you're just a little weak at running back. And it's like, yeah, I know it's a 0 RB team. And like, that's how you have to think of Travis Kelsey. Like, I know I'm going to be weak somewhere, but I have Travis Kelsey. Like, totally. Yeah, you might want to take Saquon or Derrick Henry or someone with that 6th overall pick, but they're not going to give you a 10-point advantage at the running back position over your league mates that Travis Kelsey has the upside to provide. And the wins over replacement, that's something I mean to be citing a lot more when talking about Travis Kelsey, because that really factors into fantasy importance when it comes to roster construction and things like that. So I think Darren Waller's the only other guy I have any, aspirations to be even in the same realm as Kelsey. So I think another 2, 3, 4 years of Kelsey doing what he's been doing is inside the range of outcomes, because unlike Kittle, he's not doing it all after the catch. He's doing it by getting like 1,100 air yards a year at the tight end position in concert with yards after the catch, because he's not even doing this via touchdowns either. Like, he's just doing it by being a good wide receiver playing tight end in the best offense in football, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I like it. So before we move into yours, Jake, no hesitations on Travis Kelsey after the beard shave, because that was big news, shaving that beard. Big news for Travis Kelsey.
Yeah, I gotta say it was pretty disappointing. He's a really good-looking guy, but I think he's much better looking with the beard. The jawline just isn't great. Yeah, the jawline just isn't great. So he definitely has to regrow that beard. But I'm not sure how if I'm going to move him down my ranks. Because of the beard shave.
You can see the resemblance to his brother a little bit more, I think.
Oh yeah, beard,
absolutely.
Yeah. But Jason Kelsey's had some mean beards. Speak of I think he was a former Bearcat himself.
Oh yeah,
he was.
Yeah, and so he definitely had some mean beards in his day.
I wonder what that conversation was like between those two when Jason Kelsey found out that Travis shaved the beard. I bet you that was a bit of a moment they had there.
Yeah, you just send a Ryan Fitzpatrick gift.
Yeah, for sure. So Jake, why don't you let us know who your flag plants are at the tight end position? I love them, man.
Yeah, so I've got two guys here, and neither of these guys are getting drafted as tight end ones right now, and I think that means that there's quite a bit of value here. So the first one is Adam Troutman, and the Saints have the fourth most vacated targets, and Michael Thomas is not going to be around to start the season and may not be around at all this year. So that means Troutman could pretty easily be the number 2 pass catcher behind Alvin Kamara. And just like in Sean Payton's history as a coach, we've seen tight end 1 outputs from Jared Cook in 2019, Benjamin Watson in 2017, and Jimmy Graham, who was no worse than the overall tight end 2 from 2011 to 2014. This is an offense that when they have a tight end they throw to him a lot. And Troutman seems to be the guy they like. His only competition, I believe, is Nick Van Etten. So he's obviously going to be the starting.
Johnson too, maybe, just to throw that out there. Like, I think one takeaway,
they're trying to work him as a tight end, right?
And that's kind of what scares me, is that they kind of had him in the preseason game 1. Like, I know it's really hard to try and read Sean Payton tea leaves, but they did have Juwan Johnson, who's a wide receiver convert, playing tight end, kind of in that Jared Cook role. And the only troublesome thing about that is that Adam Troutman is a very well-rounded 3-down tight end, which is a part of the upside that we loved coming out of Dayton, but it also means he could be in there to block in a scheme that we know wants to run the ball, especially if they go with Taysom Hill. So I think Troutman's just somebody I have so much of that I think my best ball inclinations are kicking in. It's like, I'm just going to pump the brakes on him while this news is out there. But do you have any concerns about them doing that?
Not necessarily. I mean, it seems like anytime a wide receiver converts to tight end, it seems like it always takes them at least a couple years to figure out how to block, if they ever do. And I don't think there's a great like historical precedence for wide receivers converting to tight end. Like, how many have successfully done that? It's pretty few and far between.
Darren Waller's about it.
Yeah. So in my opinion, with Troutman, like, I think a low end tight end 2 season, similar from what we saw like from Benjamin Watson in 2018, where he was tight end 21, or Jared Cook last year, where he was tight end 18. That's like worst case for him. And that's right around where he's being drafted right now. So like similar to McLaurin, I think he's being drafted at his floor, and he has legitimate tight end 1 upside. And if he's the second most targeted player in this offense behind Kamara, he could be like tight end 6 or something. Like, this could be a ridiculous season from Troutman. So I love the upside here, but I would not take him as your tight end 1. Like, he's a backup tight end in pretty much any league, but I love him as like a high upside tight end 2 kind of guy.
Mm-hmm. One of my favorites coming out, and loved that offense when it looked like Drew Brees was going to be slinging it. But I too am a little bit hesitant on the Taysom starting news. But here's hoping he can carve that out, and Juwan Johnson doesn't take over. Who's the next one, Jake?
Yeah, so this is my last guy, and this is a guy that I've been pumping up a lot. So I in the spring of 2020, I watched every single XFL game that I could. I absolutely adored the XFL. I don't know why, I can't really explain it rationally, but I love the XFL. And there were like 3 or 4 guys in that entire league who I thought had a chance at the next level. And by far, the guy that I thought had the best chance was Donald Parham. And so right now, he's obviously a tight end with the Chargers. Beat reporters thus far in the offseason are saying that he's going to be pretty heavily involved. He's not the starter over Jared Cook yet. And I say yet because Jared Cook is 34 years old and just can't run routes very well anymore. Like, he just can't move as well as he used to a few years ago. Donald Parham, for a guy who's 6'8", 260 pounds, can move incredibly well. Like, I would say that he's kind of like comparing anyone to Kyle Pitts is risky because Pitts is such a unicorn. But Parham is kind of like Kyle Pitts light. Like he just moves. The way he moves is ridiculous for a guy of his size. So in the XFL's lone season, Parham had the third most receiving yards, second most targets, and fifth most receptions of any receiver. And he was the only tight end to rank in the top 20 of any of those metrics.
What Kyle Pitts, like he's like the ultimate ceiling of Kyle Pitts in the XFL when the XFL was 1 year old.
Yeah, exactly. So in my opinion, like he's clearly the most talented receiving tight end on this Chargers team. And I think that he's going to carve out like a pretty significant workload. Obviously, Jared Cook being there isn't great, but like Parham's being drafted at like tight end 30 right now. Like he's basically free. You don't even have to draft him. You could probably pick him up off the waiver wire in most leagues. And because he's 6'8" and is such a good athlete, like if you look up his player profiler, it's ridiculous. Like it's honestly shocking that this guy had to play a season in the XFL. He should have been drafted. But he has like great touchdown equity. Like when you're that size and that good of an athlete, you could get a lot of red zone and end zone targets. And so that's like, I think the bullish case for Parham is like legitimate double-digit touchdown upside. Granted, I mean, it's obviously unlikely, but I love him.
Now Mike Williams is hurt. Like I don't think it's outside of the range of outcomes. I mean, it was just last year that Adam Troutman had surpassed Jared Cook in snaps when came week 9-10 in that range. So it's I like this take a lot.
Yeah, exactly. I think Cook's pretty much at the end of his career, and Parham's like clearly the more talented receiver. And if you're bullish on the Chargers offense, which I think I am, I think Herbert's being a little overdrafted, but this could be a awfully good offense this year. Then I think Parham's going to be one of the guys to own, and I absolutely love him as like a bench stash, like as a tight end too. I know I was talking about Troutman as a solid tight end too, but man, Parham, like he could have massive upside. I love him in best ball, love him in redraft. I pretty much grab Parham in like every league I'm in. I love him.
Yeah, we've been telling people that the Chargers is an offense that we want pieces of, especially in the passing game. To get from guys to Josh Palmer, Tyron Johnson. Who am I forgetting? Tyron Johnson. Who's the other guy? The other wide receiver,
Jalen
Guyton. Thank you, Josh Palmer.
Like I think it's pretty obvious.
And then
Josh Palmer has the stranglehold on that. Like the reports from camp are glowing, and Mike Williams is banged up. He's clearly the second option amongst the wide receivers. But it's all signs pointing to Eckler. Brendan Staley wasn't a great hire. Like we think this offense can be less exciting than obviously if they hired Eric Bieniemy, Joe Brady, Brian Dable or something. But I think that's just another tip in the cap to Parham, who physically makes more sense to be left in to block than Jared Cook, who we know after 12 fucking years cannot block. So I think even if they are a run heavy team, that might lend to Parham being on the field more than Jared Cook, even in Chargers La La Land.
Yeah, and Parham's only 24, so he still has a lot of room to develop. And I think he's pretty raw, like as a talent overall. So I don't know. I can't speak highly enough of Parham, to be honest. Man.
Tight ends take a long time to break out. We can't lose sight of that with some of this talent influx that's coming into the league, where we expect a bunch of production like Fant, Hawkinson, obviously Kyle Pitts now. We can't lose sight that if you got a young tight end who's got that athletic profile, might just take him a little bit of time to blossom. So I love that to finish off the tight end portion of the episode, Jake. And that's all we actually have for tonight. And I must say that was a fantastic episode. One of our classic long episodes, Jake. So we appreciate you sticking around for it. Back in the day, we used to do marathon episodes, and it is always a lot of fun, obviously. So thanks for sticking it out with us. You gave out a ton of killer information, man. So just really, really appreciate it. Go follow Jake at Jake Tribbey on Twitter. Let the people know what you're working on throughout the rest of the summer and into the season here, Jake.
Yeah. So I'll be cranking out a few more off-season pieces of Fantasy Points, but the main thing I'll be doing during the season is DFS stuff. So over at fantasypoints.com, I'll be doing the DFS early looks, which will be up Tuesday mornings, and then I'll be doing the pretty big DFS values pieces, which will be up on Friday morning. So if you like DFS, then fantasypoints.com is definitely the place to be. And I'll be pumping out a lot of great content over there. And we have an amazing team. I can't speak highly enough of the guys over there. And I can't thank you guys enough for having me on tonight. So yeah, this has been great fun.
Totally, man. Ty, you got some parting shots?
No, the pleasure's all ours, Jake. I think we pride ourselves on having some of the up and comers in the industry on. I mean, go back to Sam Wallace, Jacob Sanderson,
Edwin Porras,
at fantasypoints.com. And you mentioned some of the team men. You're talking DFS, like Scott and Wes Huber. Both these guys were nominated for the FSWA award last year for DFS Writer of the Year. You heard me, Scott. I brought it up for the
Scott loves
time
it.
now. They didn't win it, but FSWA awards aren't the be all end all. We know who has and has not won some of those awards, but the recognition is very much well deserved, because that's what I always go back to with fantasypoints.com, is surrounding yourself with the best is just process 101. And that's what you are getting at fantasypoints.com, is the best information from guys that are at the top of their field and each individual niche in this industry. And it's all, it's all in one stop, I would say. And I think Jake's work is a big part of that. I go back to some of those articles I talked about, and I'll put those in the description. I'll put the links to those after we post the show, and they'll be in the podcast links. So yeah, I just think everybody should be following him during the off season for best ball content. And then in season, the DFS stuff will be invaluable from Mr. Jake Tribbey, I imagine. And yeah, just keep doing your thing over there in Cincinnati, kid.
Yeah, will do. Thanks again, guys. This has been great.
Cincinnati kid. How many times have you got that already?
I actually don't think I've gotten that much at all. So
wow. That's how old I am. Yeah.
All right, guys. So yeah, for Jake Tribbey, obviously Tyrell McLaughlin, and I am Travis Seal. Thanks to Monkey Knife Fight, Trophy Smack, and to the Fantasy Points Media Group. Until next week, take it easy, everyone. Peace.